Planet Reddit. Today's story is...
My sister confessed in a message that she poisoned me out of jealousy of my pregnancy, and my parents still defend her. I need to share my story because I am going through a very difficult situation with my family and I would like to hear other opinions. I am a 26-year-old woman, and together with my husband Caleb, 27, we had been trying to have a baby for quite some time. About 2 months ago, we finally received the news we had been waiting for. I was pregnant. Our joy was immense, but what came next with my family was totally unexpected. My younger sister Ella, 22, has always been the favorite of our parents, Henry and Doris, both 56. During our childhood, the relationship between Ella and I was quite complicated. At first it wasn't so obvious, but as we grew up, it became increasingly clear that our parents treated us very differently. She always stood out at any family gathering. She was sociable, confident, and had a natural charm that captivated everyone. It didn't matter if it was because of her academic achievements, her personality, or her ability to make people laugh, she always ended up being the center of attention. Everything seemed to come easily to her. Her grades were perfect, she had lots of friends, and everything seemed to come easily to her. On the other hand, I was always quieter and more reserved. My interests were different to those of most people, and I often found it hard to fit in. Although my achievements were important to me, they never seemed to impress my parents as much as anything Ella did. It's not that they were directly mean to me, but it was impossible not to notice the difference in how they supported us. While they celebrated Ella's every achievement, I felt like I needed to work twice as hard just to make them notice my existence. This situation created a lot of tension between us as we grew up. Although we had some good moments, there was always that feeling of competition between us. Ella never took me seriously, and I could tell that she considered my introverted personality strange. Over time, I began to distance myself from her, partly out of frustration and partly to avoid the constant comparisons. It wasn't the best relationship between sisters, but it was what we had. When Caleb and I discovered I was pregnant, I was very excited to share the news with my family. Although I knew it wasn't Ella who was breaking the news, I hoped they would be happy for us. I thought my parents would be delighted, but when I told them, their reactions were quite strange. My parents said the right things, but you could tell something was bothering them. Ella, for her part, showed little interest and only made indirect comments like, "Wow, that was quick," or "Well, okay." Her attitude was clearly dismissive, and although it bothered me, I tried not to make a big deal of it. I wanted to focus on my joy about the baby. However, in the following weeks, the tension with Ella increased. Every time I mentioned something about the pregnancy, she would make sarcastic comments like, "Oh, so you're going to be one of those, huh?" Or "That's what happens when you don't wait long enough to get pregnant." It was obvious that she resented the fact that I was the first to have a child, which I can understand to a certain extent, but her attitude seemed pretty immature to me. And the worst thing wasn't just her behavior, but how my parents allowed it. They ignored her hurtful comments as if they didn't matter. They clearly didn't care that she was hurting me. Last week, my parents invited Caleb and me to a family dinner. It was supposed to be casual and enjoyable, just to catch up and have a good time together. Nothing special, but that's when everything completely got out of hand. When we arrived, Ella made a big fuss about a special dish she had prepared for dinner. I don't want to sound cruel, but Ella has never been good in the kitchen. I've seen her prepare meals that are either undercooked or overcooked, and more than once I've ended up with a stomach ache or food poisoning from eating what she prepares. So when she presented this dish of which she was so proud, although I was skeptical, I decided not to say anything so as not to hurt her feelings. I thought I could try it and discreetly stop eating if I felt sick. When I started eating the dish she served me, I immediately noticed a strange taste. It wasn't exactly bad, but something was definitely not right. The food left a weird sensation on my palate, but I tried to ignore it to avoid creating an uncomfortable situation and having my parents and Ella start an argument with me. Caleb noticed that I was barely eating and asked me if I was feeling all right. I told him that I just felt a bit unwell. I thought it might be nerves or pregnancy hormones. But the more I ate, the worse I felt. I really tried to hold on, but halfway through the meal I started to feel very dizzy. My stomach was churning and I felt nauseous. It was then that I realized that something was really wrong. I tried to discreetly push my plate away, but then she stared at me and, with a disturbing laugh, said something that left me frozen. "I didn't think you'd actually eat it. You're lucky. You didn't end up with food poisoning or anything, but hey, you made it, didn't you?" I was speechless, completely shocked. Was this some kind of twisted joke? I couldn't believe it. 2 months pregnant and feeling terrible, I could hardly stand up. I tried to convince myself that he was just joking, but there was nothing funny about it. It was just cruel. I had to get out of there immediately. Caleb noticed how pale I was and asked me if I was okay. He helped me get to the car and we quickly drove home. I was terrified. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something wasn't right. Caleb took me straight to the hospital because the pain had become intense. After several tests, we discovered that something in Ella's food had caused me to have a reaction. The doctors treated me and, fortunately, the baby was fine, but they warned me that it could have been very dangerous. If we hadn't sought medical attention in time, the consequences could have been much worse. Caleb was furious when he realized how serious the situation was. As soon as we got home and he made sure I was comfortable and safe, he called my parents. He didn't hold back at all. He told them straight out how outraged he was with their behavior and how they had treated me. His voice trembled with anger as he demanded to know how they could find anything funny about something that had put me and our baby in danger. When they tried to minimize it by saying it was just a harmless joke, he cut them off, making it very clear that this went far beyond a bad joke and that their actions had been cruel and irresponsible. He warned them that if they couldn't understand the seriousness of the situation, they would not be welcome around me or our son. Seeing Caleb standing up for me was very comforting. It was clear that he wouldn't allow anyone, not even my family, to put us in danger or treat me in such a thoughtless way. The next day, I contacted my parents to talk about what had happened. Instead of showing concern, they seemed annoyed with me. My mother said something like, "You're fine now, aren't you? You got over it, so what's the problem?" My father also played it down, saying I was exaggerating. I was stunned. I tried to explain to them how serious the situation had been, but they kept insisting that Ella hadn't meant any harm. They thought I was making too much of it. The situation worsened when Ella didn't even bother to apologize. She just laughed and said I was being overly sensitive. She even had the nerve to say that I was ruining their fun by making an issue out of this. My parents didn't support me either. Instead of recognizing the seriousness of the situation, they treated it as if it wasn't important. At that moment, I felt completely frustrated and hurt. My parents seemed more interested in defending Ella than in listening to how I felt. I couldn't believe they were justifying her behavior. It was as if they were completely blind to the seriousness of the matter. The situation continued to unfold. In the days that followed, I noticed a change in the family atmosphere. Several relatives who were at dinner began to contact me. Some expressed their concern and asked me how I was feeling after what had happened. Meanwhile, others, including members of the extended family, began to distance themselves from my parents and Ella. They commented on how inappropriate it was to make that kind of joke, especially about a pregnant woman. The more feedback I received, the more evident it became that my parents were the only ones defending Ella and what she had done. There is now a real division in our family. My parents are really angry with me for ruining everything and making Ella look bad. They keep saying that I'm just trying to make her look like the bad guy. But honestly, the more I think about it, the harder it is for me to understand why they don't see how serious this situation is. I really don't want to create family conflict, but I can't just ignore what happened and pretend it didn't happen. How am I supposed to act like everything is fine when things could have ended tragically? I could have lost my baby. I feel lost on how to handle the relationship with my parents when they are willing to overlook this behavior. She hasn't even apologized, and I feel like my family is making me the culprit in all of this. I need to know if I'm overreacting by making an issue out of this or if I should just forget about it and move on like they want me to. Update 1. It has been approximately 2 weeks since that terrible family dinner, and I need to share more details with you. A few days ago, my aunt contacted me to see how I was doing. She had found out what had happened from other family members, who were really shocked by Ella's behavior. Among all the relatives, my aunt was one of the few who showed genuine concern for my well-being. She asked me how I was feeling and how I was coping emotionally with the whole situation. Talking to her was really comforting. She had always been on my side, and it felt really good to have family support. Towards the end of our conversation, she suggested something that I hadn't considered: filing a police report against Ella. She mentioned it in such a calm and sincere way that it took me by surprise. The idea of involving the police seemed like a big step to me. However, the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My aunt explained to me that Ella's actions were not just a prank gone wrong, but something potentially dangerous. She reminded me that I have every right to protect myself and my baby, especially if my parents refuse to make Ella take responsibility for her actions. At that moment, I truly understood the gravity of the situation and how close I had come to something terrible happening. Although I wasn't sure if I would file the report, I felt validated to hear that someone else recognized that my concerns were legitimate. After speaking to my aunt, I shared the idea with Caleb. He has been incredibly supportive throughout this whole situation. When I mentioned the possibility of filing a police report, he supported me without hesitation. He assured me that whatever my decision, he would stand by me. He told me that if I felt going to the police was necessary to protect me and our future child, he would fully back me up. I felt more confident knowing that I didn't have to passively accept what had happened or allow my family to minimize my feelings. I could take action. And maybe that was exactly what I needed to do. However, it is a very difficult decision. If I decide to go to the police, it would probably destroy any possibility of reconciliation with my family. Although I feel deeply disappointed by my parents and Ella, taking that step would be irreversible. I still feel guilty, as if maybe I am exaggerating as my parents insist. I can't help but wonder if I am being too dramatic or if filing a complaint would be excessive. But I also know that I can't ignore something so serious, especially since it affected my health and could have endangered my baby. My parents are really upset with me, claiming that I am trying to ruin Ella's life and that I am making too much of everything. They have even suggested that I am acting out of spite and seeking revenge because she is the favorite, which is completely far from the truth. This has nothing to do with jealousy or competition. It is about my safety and that of my unborn baby. The more I think about it, the more frustrated I feel. I cannot understand how my parents do not see the seriousness of this situation or how they can defend Ella's actions. It is as if they live in a parallel reality where everything she does is perfectly fine. On the other hand, Caleb has been in touch with other family members to get their opinions, and many agree with him. Some relatives have even decided to distance themselves from my parents and Ella because they don't want to be associated with people capable of doing something so dangerous. It's comforting to know that others recognize the seriousness of the situation, but it saddens me deeply that my own parents can't see it, and that hurts more than I can say. I find myself in a very complicated situation. Should I go ahead and file the police report to make everything official, even if it means that my relationship with my parents and my sister could be completely destroyed, or should I just ignore it like they want and pretend it never happened? It's something I struggle with daily. Part of me feels that I need to stand my ground and show that Ella's actions were unacceptable. But then there is that constant fear about how this could push me further away from my family. Would filing a police report be too much? Am I overreacting? Or is it a justified step after everything that has happened? Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since that terrible family dinner, and the situation has become even more complicated since my last update. I'm really struggling with all of this, and I need advice on what to do. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who took the time to comment on my original post. Your opinions and advice have really helped me see things more clearly. I have been struggling with guilt and self-doubt, but reading all your perspectives has made me feel so much more confident and supported. It means a lot to me to know that so many of you see this as a serious issue and validate my concerns. I have considered all your comments, and they have helped me make a decision that I feel is right for me and my baby. It is difficult to take such a stand against my family, but I now know that protecting myself and holding Ella accountable is the best thing I can do. I really appreciate each and every one of your comments. Thank you for helping me find clarity in all of this. At first, I was completely shocked. The idea of filing a complaint seemed like a huge step, and, honestly, I hadn't even considered it until that moment. But my aunt pointed out that what Ella did wasn't just a silly joke or a mistake. It could have been really dangerous. She reminded me that my well-being and the safety of my baby were at stake, and that I shouldn't feel pressured to minimize it just because it involves the family. It's a very difficult decision to make. I know that filing a complaint would mean breaking any remaining ties with my family, and my parents would probably never forgive me. They are already angry, saying that I am exaggerating and accusing me of holding a grudge against Ella just because she is their favorite. My parents have tried to distort this whole issue by turning it into a jealousy problem, which is far from the truth. This is not about sibling rivalry or grudges. It's about my safety and that of my baby. Apparently, my parents found out that I was considering taking legal action. Instead of talking to me directly, they contacted Caleb hoping he would talk some sense into me. I guess they thought he would convince me to let it go, but Caleb didn't hold back. He told them exactly how upset he was about letting Ella get away with it. He made it very clear that if they thought he was going to let this pass, they were very much mistaken. I wasn't there during the call, but from what he told me, he was very direct in expressing how deeply disappointed he was in them for downplaying something so dangerous. Shortly after the call, I received a text message from Ella. It was the first time she had tried to explain herself since the incident. The message began with her saying that she hadn't intended for it to go that far, but as I read on, her tone became darker. In fact, she admitted that she didn't want me to have a baby before her, which I already suspected. She said she felt she had the right to be the first to start a family and that seeing me pregnant was like a slap in the face. Her jealousy over something as natural and personal as a pregnancy was deeply disturbing. The message went on, and the more I read, the more it seemed like she was confessing that she had planned to poison me out of pure malice. She even insinuated that it wasn't just a joke or a prank gone wrong, but that she did it because she couldn't bear the thought of me becoming a mother before her. I felt terrible. I didn't reply to her message, not because I didn't have a lot to say, but because I realized that replying would only make things worse. The only way to handle the situation was to ignore it. Ella's first apology seemed more like a weak excuse, and I thought that maybe she would finally understand the gravity of her actions. I held on to the hope that she would start to reflect on what she had done, but instead, the fact that I didn't reply to her message only made her angrier. The next day I received another message from her, and it was much darker than the first. Her whole tone had changed. She wasn't even trying to defend her actions anymore. Instead, she jumped straight to blaming me, calling me selfish for getting pregnant before her, claiming that I was stealing her moment, and saying that I deserved what happened at dinner. She even made some terrible threats, warning that if I tried to ruin her life by talking to anyone or pressing charges, I would regret it. I was speechless. It was obvious that she was desperate to protect herself, even if it meant trying to scare me into silence. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep this in the family. If Ella was capable of saying such horrible things to her own sister, knowing also that she had already put my health at risk, I had to take action. Her words, the way she admitted her jealousy and tried to justify her actions, it was all there in writing. I knew I had to save these messages as evidence. After seeing that last message, I made a decision: I need to file a police report. I know it's going to cause a big problem in my family, and I'm sure my parents will see it as some kind of unforgivable betrayal, but I can't just sit back and pretend this didn't happen. It's not just about me, it's about protecting my baby and making sure Ella understands that there are consequences for her actions. This is not something I can ignore, especially after she reaffirmed her actions and threatened me. I am truly devastated by everything that has happened. My parents have practically sided with Ella, ignoring the real danger I was in, all just to keep the peace. It's devastating to see them so oblivious to how serious this is, choosing to back her instead of being there for me when I need them most. Some family members have already distanced themselves from my parents and Ella, saying they can't be around people who support that kind of behavior. It's comforting to know that others recognize how serious this is, but it only makes me feel even more alone when it comes to my own family. In the end, I have to do what is right for me and my child. Even if it means taking this drastic step, I know that by filing this complaint, my relationship with my parents and Ella will probably be broken beyond repair. But I can't just ignore the fact that my own sister endangered my health and the life of my baby out of jealousy. Her text messages, her threats, everything shows a level of malice that I cannot ignore. I don't know if this is the right decision, but I feel like it's the only option left if I want to protect myself and hold her accountable. I'm really scared about what comes next. I don't want to hurt my family, but I can't keep acting like everything is fine. And considering the fact that my family tried to ruin the family I was building, I shouldn't be so worried about hurting their feelings. If standing up for myself means cutting ties with my family, then maybe that's something I just have to deal with. Update 3. It's been a few weeks since my last update, and I wanted to let you all know what has happened since then. Things have gotten even more complicated, but I have finally made a decision that I feel is the right one for me, Caleb, and our baby. As I mentioned in the last update, I was planning to file a police report, and I did. After I filed the report, things with my parents took a turn for the worse. When they found out, they were furious. They didn't expect me to actually follow through with this, but once I showed them the evidence, the text messages, the threats, everything, they couldn't ignore the severity of Ella's actions. Instead of acknowledging it, they immediately tried to do damage control, trying to minimize the whole situation. They distorted everything, acting as if I was exaggerating or just trying to create drama. They couldn't understand why I wasn't letting it go, why I was making such a big deal out of it. My father, especially, insisted that it was just a family matter and that I shouldn't let it ruin my relationship with Ella. He kept saying things like families argue and then they make up, treating it as if it were just a small fight that could be resolved with a conversation. But I couldn't understand how they couldn't see that this wasn't just a disagreement. It was a serious threat. I could have lost my baby, I could have died. My mother, meanwhile, was even more upset. She went into a frenzy trying to make me feel guilty for not handling this within the family. She claimed that by going to the police, I was destroying the family and breaking their hearts. It was very difficult to listen to her, to be honest. She seemed more concerned about her feelings than about what had actually happened. There were many tears and blame directed at me. She made it clear that she thought I was being childish and that I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding. It was as if she couldn't see that what Ella did was much more than just a simple mistake. Anyway, I decided not to pay attention to what they had to say. Of course, things got even more complicated after that. My parents were furious. They called me every name in the book and accused me of destroying the family. They said I was causing drama and that I should let it go. They tried to make me feel guilty, but I knew this wasn't about them. It was about what was best for me and my baby. My parents, along with Ella, kept trying to defend their actions and minimize what happened. They insisted it was just a mistake, but I knew the truth. It was dangerous, intentional, and premeditated. After everything that had happened, I also decided to apply for a restraining order against Ella. I couldn't allow her to come anywhere near me or my baby. I was tired of the manipulation, the threats, and the toxic environment she had created. Ella was out of my life for good, and this was the step I needed to take to make sure it stayed that way. The restraining order was granted, and it feels like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. As for my parents, they haven't taken the news well. They are still on Ella's side, refusing to see how serious the situation is. It's heartbreaking, but there's nothing more I can do. They've made their decision and I've made mine. I've distanced myself from them for now, and I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I made the right decision. My priority is my safety and that of my child, and I can't apologize for that. In the end, I feel like I did what I needed to do. I took a stand for myself and for my baby, and I'm not going to let anyone make me feel like I'm wrong for that. Ella will no longer be a part of my life, and I've done everything I can to make sure she stays away. I am looking to the future and focusing on my health, my baby, and building the family I want without Ella's toxicity or my parents. Thanks again to everyone who has been so supportive. Your advice has really helped me through the hardest part of this journey.